Why were these old boots more of a challenge for me, as it turned out, than the grand architecture that I more usually draw? Well, with grand architecture, there's a lot of vertical and horizontal lines and elements and alignments that we can make. But with a pair of old boots that are fairly crumpled and creased out of their normal alignment, and with one tipped over on its side, there's nothing particularly geometric about it. It's not so easy to choose an obvious part to start with that can be drawn accurately and in proportion and to reference from it. So I'm sorry I did miss the first minute of this drawing, but I decided to start with that central tongue section, and I actually started with the horizontal line at the top of the tongue, and then I went to the right hand side and just did that bit of the shoe there. I probably don't even know enough about shoes to be able to talk about this very clearly. And so this top section was sort of okay. I want to suggest the padding in the shoe. I want to give a sense that this shoe is constructed of various elements that give it a fair bit of width and of roundness on its edging. And so now we have, unfortunately, this great tangle of shoelaces, which I wanted to try and represent accurately. But how do you make the commitment to ink line so easily with such an unfamiliar subject and be sure of getting it in the right place? So I decided that it was more important that I get these eyelets lined up correctly. And so you can see me doing a series of dotted lines as to where I think the eyelets might go, trying to visualize the laces as well. And I did do a dot where I thought that lace was going to come down to. So I had a dot that was in effect indicating the lower section of the hanging laces, and then I could work out the eyelets a bit more easily. So I'm trying to see those eyelets as basically two straight lines and indicate in a non-committal way on my drawing where they were going to be. And that helped me have confidence in that I had the right size space to now infill with these hanging shoelaces. These are the shoes I was wearing when I took many of the photos of Paris and of European cities that I'm now drawing. Now I actually stick an extra eyelet in there. I'm aware of that straight away, that I've just committed to doing those without enough observation and certainly without counting. I have a general rule that things that you can count, I count to make sure that I get the right number, or at least aim for the right number, and I didn't do that this time. So I was a bit annoyed because I have a bit more shoelace here now. I have an extra row of laces, but I don't think anyone's going to get too upset about that as long as the shoes still look like a credible pair of boots. So with these side parts where they're creased and bulging, I'm trying to see these as shapes. Now, I talk about understanding three-dimensional form of what we draw a lot, but sometimes it's actually more accurate to not do that and to see instead two-dimensional shapes that have just height and width, and depending on the shape, maybe some curves too. So I'm trying to see the various shapes that these sections make and then draw them as shapes. And again, a few dots trying to work out where to put the end of the shoe and trying to get these bulges, roundnesses correct. Now, as soon as I do this hatching, I'm not so sure whether it was a good idea, but this is a fairly thicker line than what I would normally use to draw a subject of this scale, this size. But I think it's an appropriate size line because they are a heavy, hefty subject. And I think the heavier line gives it that sense of solidity that the subject has both in its shape and form, but also in its usage. And now trying to get the right depth down there for the sole. And now I've done enough of the shoe outline that I'm just wanting to put off drawing the second shoe, which I always thought was going to be more challenging, and in fact it was. And part of the reason it's more challenging is because it's in a less, if you like, identifiable pose, a less familiar pose for looking at a shoe, and because we have to get the scale right. We have to have this second shoe relate to the first shoe in size because they're obviously a pair. And that was the thing that was most concerning me, whether I would get the proportions scaled correctly so that the shoe looked like it was the same size. So I'm trying to align. So I'm using the same principles I used when I draw my architecture, but it's just not as straightforward to use them with all these, in effect, free-form lines. There's not a straight line in the whole thing. And I'm honestly not sure drawing the laces first was the best way to go. How would you go? Now, obviously, if I were using a pencil, I could rough these out a little bit and get a stronger sense of the proportions being correct and the positioning. But I don't have that option at this point. Now, the roundness of the heel to the right of that shoelace, I do enlarge that shortly because I decide that it's not large enough. And fortunately, it's a dark area, and with hatching I was able to disguise all of that. And again, this is why I say don't get too upset when you make a mistake, because invariably we can do something to correct it and make it not look as obvious. Generally, the wrong line, the wrong shape will be more obvious than some sort of correction. Just positioning the label for my shoes. And now trying to work out what's happening here. And so at this point, I'm feeling that the opening is not wide enough and I need to increase the size. See, there I go. So get the right size and now work out how I'm going to hide those extra lines. But in a subject again, such as this, with fairly brusque line work, it does give a bit of room for some minor corrections. I just realized I hadn't actually finished the left-hand boot. Of course, this photo of my old boots will be on my channel community page if you'd like to have a go drawing it. I think it's a really good idea too. And look, you won't have the pressure of videoing and posting it on the internet. So you can take some risk because I think it is a good example of a subject that's familiar and yet unfamiliar to draw, that is very challenging to draw, but really, really tests our ability to see shapes, to see two-dimensional shapes, and to, in a sense, reproduce those shapes and position them together correctly to get the overall shape, the overall composition that we're wanting. So I can really recommend doing this. And if the first effort looks a bit distorted, to have a second go straight away, to see this as a fast exercise. This took me 22 minutes in real time to do, so it's a little bit longer than I would have liked, but I did in the end have to do more observation. There are 2 spots in the video where I probably cut out 45 seconds where I didn't draw anything because I was just really trying to see what was there. And a bit of stitching on the label. There we go. Trying to draw the logo. They are very comfortable boots, I must say. And now just deciding that I'm just about done. A little bit of shadow underneath. I'm not going to draw anything else but the shadow. I want the boots to stand out. And a bit of shadow for that lace. And then I think my old boots are pretty well done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, I never thought I'd be putting my old boots onto public display, but there you have it. Look, it was not an easy subject to draw for me, but I did really enjoy it. And I think it's great to push ourselves into new areas, whatever our particular comfort zone usually is. So I really hope you give this a go. But look, whatever you draw or however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.